Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic, and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders, and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, and welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We are in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. And I am your host, Pavini Moray, and today I am super excited to introduce you to Langston Kahn. And Langston is a queer Black, New York City-based shamanic practitioner specializing in emotional clearing and radical transformation. He stands firmly at the crossroads, his practice informed by the Western modality of interrelationship focusing, initiations into traditions of the African diaspora, the contemporary shamanic tradition of the last masked center, and the guidance of his helping spirits and ancestors weaving it all together. He firmly believes that no emotional wounds or trauma are beyond healing, and is devoted to supporting adventurous souls in transmuting what has been poison in their lives into medicine for themselves and the world. And for more information about Langston and his work, you can check out his website, occupy-your-heart.com, occupy-your-heart.com. And hi, Langston, and welcome. So glad to have you here today.
Hi, Pavini. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. So just speak a little bit about, if you would, your work with Occupy Your Heart, and in particular, your own particular connection with your ancestors.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. My work with Occupy Your Heart did come out of a deep ancestral healing that I did, actually. For a long time, I had a healing practice where I was both guiding people in some of the emotional clearing work I do, which sort of helps people to track triggers and stuck patterns and trauma to its root in their body and then clear it there. And we can talk a little more about that later, but I've been doing that work, shamanic healing work, which is sort of dealing with the stuff that we can't find in the body completely, the stuff when there's like soul loss, where from a shamanic perspective, a part of you has become lost in kind of space and time because we abandoned that part of ourselves or that part of ourselves abandoned us. And I need to go retrieve that part for a client and bring it back so they can begin to integrate it and use the tools they have to work with it in their body. Or things like intergenerational trauma that require sort of ancestral healing work, or things like sort of the miscellaneous shamanic category, like energy in, energy out, just intrusive spirits or curses or sort of energy body healing that's needed that might come up during a session. So those are sort of the two main aspects of the work I was offering, but I was offering it in a very small way. It was mostly only through referrals. I didn't have a big presence. I just had like a little WordPress site. And I've been offering it that way for about 3 years, while also teaching some classes. And I just realized that I needed to move into a place where I was able to offer my work and show up for my work in a way that was bigger in the world, in a way that felt like how I was presenting the work was coherent with the way that I was doing the work currently, which had a lot of heart and meaning for me. But I felt like the way I was presenting it didn't reflect that heart and meaning that I felt for the work I was doing. And as I was doing some ancestral healing work, I came to realize there was I don't know how detailed I should get with the story, but essentially there was a merchant who had taken this big risk in my ancestral line and gone out with a bunch of money to try to sort of make his fortune for his family. And, long story short, he ended up getting kidnapped by pirates, and then the ship kind of got wrecked, and he was just sort of stranded on the ship, tied up, still not even really knowing he was dead, just kind of stuck in that moment of feeling like it was such a horrible thing that he had taken this risk in service of his passion and his purpose that involved money. And that was a big mistake. And he let down his family, and he should never have done that. So in engaging with him and bringing some healing to that situation, using some of the techniques that I have, I found myself now that the pattern was cleared in my ancestral line of avoiding taking risks in service of purpose and passion. I needed to do that in my own life. And at that time, I realized the best vehicle for me doing that was creating this container for my work that allowed me to offer it in a bigger way, and that which would take a significant amount of money for me to actually put towards it, not really knowing how people were going to receive it or what would happen, but just needing to take that risk in some way. And it took me way longer than it should have. It was a process of about 8 months of doing a lot of sort of emotional healing work and ancestral healing work continuing, and dancing, just getting out of my mind and into my body. And eventually, and then of course through all of that, continued to come back to writing things like copy for the website and working with a photographer, working with someone to design a logo, and just things I had never done, energy and time and resources I had never put into the work that had the most heart and meaning for me. I've been putting more into my day job at that time, or into my creative work or other facets of my life that were much less coherent with my heart and more hidden in a way. And so when I finally was able to do that and release that website into the world, it actually ended up facilitating me having an invitation to a conference that I then ended up traveling to where I had seen that ancestor was from, which was London, and which was totally unexpected. And just feeling this sense of how in making that expression that was coherent with what had heart and meaning to me, and taking that risk in service of my purpose and passion, it then literally carried me to a place I hadn't been before, and ended up involving making a lot of connections, which helped facilitate my practice. And it was a really powerful and fascinating experience. I just think it's interesting that you asked about ancestors in the context of my practice, Occupy Your Heart, because they do have a big connection to me. And the logo for my website, which is a compass within a heart, actually came from that ancestor, because once I had fully healed him and fully healed the pattern in my own life, then I was able to call him back as a true ancestor helping spirit, now that he had sort of gone to the ancestral realms and sorted out his baggage. And when I called him back, the name he gave to me was Captain with his heart for a compass, as the energy sort of he embodies in my line. And so that's where the logo for my practice came from. Because I think a lot of the work I do is, rather than being additive or like some sense of like ascension or evolution, more this sense of stripping away all of the stuff that gets in the way of us being able to really trust our heart and be in guiding us on the path of our purpose, like that crucible where we can bring in the crystal clarity and intelligence of our mind and the fiery passion in our belly together to guide us on that path of purpose.
Yeah, thanks for the in-depth quality of the story and how your own experience of ancestral healing led to, greater manifestations of the work that you're doing. I think it's just like we don't have a lot of examples of the benefits that happens when we focus our attention on ancestral healing, right? It's kind of like this vague thing, like, oh yeah, it'll be good to heal my ancestors, but like, okay, what are the actual tangible, like, and practical, like, what am I going to get out of doing this process, right? It sounds like in what you're saying, like ancestors are really woven through and through. Like you are, by doing the work that you're doing, you are providing a healing container for them to heal and also continue the purpose that was flowing down this line. And I'm just wondering, because I feel like the next question I want to ask you answered on the personal level and gave an example of, but talk a little bit about how we do embody the less than useful patterns of our ancestors, both the recent ancestors and the more ancient ones. I think sometimes when folks are talking about or thinking about their ancestors. They're just thinking about the dead that they knew. And in my thoughts of it, it was like, well, the challenges that we embody that are ancestral can be, hundreds or thousands of years old. And so, how do we embody these lessons and useful patterns? How do we start to recognize them and identify them? And how do we start to shift them?
That is a wonderful question. So the perspective that I was taught to approach ancestors with, and which I found through my experience to be very true and resonant with me, is that oftentimes somewhere in a line, we have ancestors who don't die well. And we have a lot more of these nowadays than we used to. In a sense, you might even say we have an epidemic of unresolved dead people because of a few different reasons. We have, or at least from a shamanic perspective, looking at indigenous cultures around the world, we no longer have people tending the birth of children, in a sense, or in large part we don't, talking to the spirit of the child before they come through the mother as a medium and sensing what is this child bringing as their gift for the community. And we don't have a community to receive that child either necessarily. It might just be dependent on like one parent or two parents as being the sole community that child has. And then we don't have that child of that purpose as they're growing up. And we no longer have initiation into adulthood in large part, this time when people can really drop the baggage they carry from childhood and be reminded of that purpose energy they came here to live on behalf of their community and come back as a true adult that can just engage with their parents as fellow human beings and their other villagers as fellow human beings, rather than have all of these projections from the past layering their ability to engage with community. And we also don't have tending death in our culture. Well, often tending death now is more about caring for the living, which is important work. But we often neglect the tending of the spirits of the deceased, making sure they travel safely to the ancestral realms and they're helped to let go of any attachments they might still carry from their life. So when we don't have all three of those things, we get more and more people reaching the end of their life feeling very unresolved because they haven't lived their purpose. And from a shamanic perspective, that's sort of our one sole duty and obligation, is finding vehicles for that energy that we came here uniquely to live. And so they're feeling all that weight of not having done that. And they're also maybe very sick or ill because of, again, a sense of health from a shamanic perspective comes from living that purpose. And also there's a million other things, of course, in our culture now that contribute to us maybe not being as healthy as we might like to be. It takes some energy to die well at the end of your life. So we're also having hospitals where their main directive is to keep people alive at all costs, in a sense. And so people finally get to that moment where they're needing to transition and die. They don't necessarily have the support to do that well, or a cosmology that tells them what happens when they die that's actually resonant with truths that help people to die in a good way and feel safe releasing their body, not have a sense of like judgment or fear at that moment of death, to be able to surrender to the help of the divine in that moment. And so, again, with all of that combination, we get people who die and they don't go anywhere. They're just dead. They're still here. Sometimes they don't know that they're dead. Sometimes they do know that they're dead, but they're still wanting to fix and change things that they weren't able to in their life. And how that often manifests is that these spirits then, as you might call it, ghosts or restless dead, they are trying to resolve the issues of their life using the free will or the ability to co-create reality of the living, because they no longer have that ability now that they've lost their body. And so then what happens is, or what I see as a practitioner, is that much younger people are coming down with illnesses of much older people. There's also this sense of these beliefs that people carry, this sense of like, there's just never enough money, or, you're never really safe. Whenever you feel safe, something bad's about to happen. Like just these beliefs that we're born with, that we carry from our unresolved ancestors, that we think are ours or we think are just reality. But they're not beliefs everyone carries. And so what I find as I track back to certain problems in many of my clients' life, and in my own life, we get back to the original ancestor that first died unresolved. And then as they were continuing to fumble around and try to solve their issues, hijacking the free will of the living, snowballed that destructive pattern down the line. And it got bigger and bigger and more problematic until it manifests as these much bigger issues in people's life of their descendants. And so the work I do as a practitioner is to go to that place in the person's line where that earliest ancestor manifested the particular problem they're dealing with, resolve, like talk to that ancestor, help them to do whatever they need to do to resolve that energy so they can move on fully. And which is a little different than psychopomp work, like just trying to get someone out of here and into the ancestral realms. It takes a little more sense of tracking energies and really understanding what are the beliefs that are holding this ancestor here at this time, and how can I use my free will and ability to co-create as a practitioner and lend that to this dead person so we can actually create a true resolution and not just be spinning in the same pattern they've been spinning in for so long. And so once I do that, then there's a period of time that a person needs to be working to clear the pattern in their own life. And that might look like, what they need to do is I usually give them a spreadsheet actually. And we list out the patterns that we identified in the ancestral healing, because there might be, one, there might be four. And then we look at where that pattern shows up in each sphere of their life, whether that be their, mental sphere, their physical sphere, their spiritual sphere, their emotional sphere, their intimate relationship with their self, their intimate relationship with others, their work relationship, their family, just looking at where is the main place this particular pattern shows up. And then working in partnership with their ancestor and their helping spirits to figure out what are the next actions they can take to begin to transform that pattern in their own life. Because what I have been taught and what I have found is that when we try to call back our ancestors before we have resolved the problematic pattern that they embodied, it just exacerbates the problem in their own life. But then once we've fully cleared that in our own life, then we can do a ceremony to fully ancestralize those ancestors. There's a lot of different ways people approach that ancestralization process, but then we can call them back into some kind of object or container or vessel that we can keep on our ancestral shrine and then have access to their wisdom and their particular medicine. And the beautiful thing is that with these problematic ancestors, once they've been fully healed and we've healed a pattern that they embodied in their own life, they have a lot of wisdom to share because they know what it's like to really fuck up badly. And so they can guide us in not doing that ourselves. And when we haven't done that, when we're trying to shift these patterns that are related to the ancestors in our own life, how I experience that is kind of like a wave that just overtakes me again and again. It's like no matter how much personal work, whatever I'm doing to shift and move the energy, it's not moving because the true root of that energy is not in me. It's in the ancestral realms. And so another way I might experience that is through almost like possession sometimes too. And you can see this in people sometimes. It's like something overtakes you and you say something or do something that isn't really intellectually makes sense, doesn't really intellectually make sense or isn't really intellectually true, but you still feel it is true and you still do it anyway, even though you know it's not quite the right thing to do. And it's almost like you can't stop yourself. And that's often how I see another way of problematic ancestral patterns manifesting for people.
That's great. What's coming to mind as I'm listening is I'm curious about the intrusions of other energies that can come ancestrally too. Like I'm thinking about like addiction or like the spirit of alcohol or sugar or, or like diabetes even, or, diseases that are caused by intrusive energies that might have been burdens that we've received from our ancestors. And so I love the clarity of this model that you're bringing of it's a both and. It's like there's no magic pill that's just going to like fix me, obviously, and there's no magic pill that's just going to fix my ancestors. There's a mutuality, there's reciprocity in the relationship of healing, right? That like I have to heal and they have to heal. And then once that healing is underway and in a good place, then it's like the line clears and whatever was blocking the line from kind of that free flow of love and goodness is clearing, can move forward. So you spoke about helping spirits, and I feel like I just named some harming spirits. How, I've heard people talk in like witchy communities about helping spirits and guides and stuff like that. But it's different than ancestors. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the difference between, helping spirits and ancestors, how you came to those relationships that you have. And then I guess this is kind of a three-part question, how we can find trustworthy allies in the unseen realm.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I guess I would start by saying that all of these terms differ from tradition to tradition and from culture to culture. So it's slightly arbitrary. Like essentially helping spirit at its root just means a spirit that is helpful. So ancestor helping spirit could be a particular type of helping spirit. And I would tack on the word helping spirit to ancestors when they are true ancestral helping spirits, in the sense that they have gone to the ancestral realms, unpackaged their, unraveled their life and made that journey successfully and merge with a sense of like oneness or divinity. So then they can come back and give us that perspective of someone who understands what it is to be human and understands what it is to be spirit, and not just still stuck in their limited human perspectives and desires from when they were living. So that's how I would define an ancestor helping spirit, as opposed to just an ancestor or just a dead person. And another thing that makes this even more hard to talk about is that in many indigenous communities, such as like the Dagara, they'll just talk about ancestors as everything. Like they'll say the ancestors, and they'll mean, spirits of the land, helping spirits, elements, it's all just the ancestors. Because we're all related in a sense, in that same sense that in, like First Nations prayers often say all my relation, the Takuyasin. And so with that said, how I use the term helping spirit is a little more specific. And when I use that term, I'm often talking about either the animal helping spirits or the plant helping spirits, or like sort of humanoid guides that are kind of in between, that their sole duty and agenda is to help us live our purpose and help us to choose well and help us to really see our power and have a reflection, a mirror of that power, so we can learn to embody it and integrate it. So, for example, to discuss one of my own helping spirits, I had a dream once that I knew was not quite normal. It wasn't quite a normal dream, like where you wake up and you sort of remember parts of it and parts you don't. Like I woke up and every aspect of it was crystal clear to me. And what happened in the dream was that a bird kept landing on my chest again and again. To my teacher at the time, my spiritual teacher at the time, who was in a bed next to me in the dream. And I said, "Is this my power animal?" Because that was the word I had at that time. And she said, "Yes." And then I asked her, "Can I tell it to go away?" Because there were all of these parasites and worms and like bitey insects that were falling off of this bird every time it landed on me and hurting me. And so I wanted to let this filthy thing go away from me. And she said, "Yes, but you have to ask its name first." And so I asked its name and I received its name, and then it flew away. Now, I eventually, I won't go into the whole story, but I eventually worked some with my spiritual community at that time. That was when I was in a Gardnerian coven, and we journeyed together to that spirit and asked, what's wrong? What's going on? And the spirit happened to be a raven. So in particular, Raven fashion, it was like, nothing's wrong with me. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, you're the one that I came to tell something was wrong with, and just kind of laughed at me. And what it was that he was saying that I, at that time, was covered in Paris, reflecting that back to me. And he also said it was time to begin what he called my great work. And he said, you have no idea what the fuck that means, but just it's time to do that. And so that eventually led me to pursuing a shamanic healing session, which led to me starting to train with one of my core teachings, which is the Last Mass Center for Shamanic Studies. But that spirit eventually became one of my core helping spirits in my spiritual court, who teaches me a lot about clarity and discernment, and that way that carrion feeders kind of know what's like delicious, good energy that needs to be reclaimed and what needs to be tossed aside. And also a sense of an ability to communicate skillfully with people with very different perspectives, but also different spirits, that are different sort of spirit languages in a sense, to help me mediate in that way. And so in embodying all those qualities when I first met him, I didn't have any of those qualities. But over time, in working with him through shamanic journeying, going into trance to a drum, and going to speak with and meet with and commune with and work with this spirit, I began to learn to embody those qualities in my own self. And I think that's one of the key roles of our helping spirits, to help us to embody those powers that they reflect to us when we first meet them, but also to choose well. So a helping spirit is not trying to tell us what to do, like the way you might think to look to like an omniscient, all-powerful deity to tell you what to do. A helping spirit wants, like an animal helping spirit specifically, they just want to help you to understand what will be the outcome of your choices, what will be the likely lessons you will learn from certain choices you will make, so then you can choose well as you move through life and face many different crossroads, so to speak. And so that's one differentiation I make between helping spirits and, say, even like deities. Like, deities can be a kind of helping spirit, but in how I use the term, often deities have very specific protocol and agendas of their own. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just a reality. Just like, your person you meet on the street, like, who doesn't just instantly want to help you and help you to be more empowered. Like, they want to get on with their day and do stuff. So I find in my experience with deities, they're more like that. They have their own agenda and they have their own protocol from the history of people that have worked with them. Whereas often our helping spirits or animal helping spirits or plant helping spirits that are coming to us, yes, they might have their own protocol, but there's a lot more patience because they're often more uniquely assigned to us in a sense to reflect a very specific part of ourselves back to us. Does that feel like it answers your questions?
Yeah, totally. The last part was about trustworthy. Like, how do we know who we can trust and who we can't? And it sounds like in your answer, in your experience, you met the Raven, but you didn't immediately trust the Raven. There had to be more relationship building, more work that was done, like just like you would in any relationship, I'm guessing, of like process of discernment over time of building relationship and like really vetting a spirit, just like you would vet a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And those first meetings are very hard because often we're battling both internal doubt, just as contemporary people, of trusting our relationship with spirit and our own ability to discern. Also, we haven't, some people think that they just need to get better to communicate with spirit better, but it's not, oftentimes, it's not just a process of training yourself to communicate with spirit better, but also training the spirit how to communicate with you well in a way that you can understand and take action based upon. And that's something you find with ancestors as well, that it's not in indigenous traditions all around the world. It's not just about learning to connect with the ancestors, but also the ancestors learning to connect well with you in a way that facilitates health and well-being. So I guess how we determine if they're trustworthy, a lot of it is a feeling. Like, especially with things like shamanic journeying, you're bringing your body into the journey. You're not sort of going somewhere else, like maybe like what you might call more astral travel, or more like psychic awareness. You're very much bringing fullness of your body, your heart, your emotions, your mind, and your spirit all together into that journey. And so a lot of how we discern trustworthiness of spirits, that gut feeling we get when we're encountering them. Now, trauma, of course, can distort or affect our ability to make those trust calls. And so if we know we're someone who has experienced a lot of trauma or has a lot of wounds around trust, we might need to work with a practitioner to help us make those initial connections with spirits we know we can trust. But another thing I think is important to understand is that these aren't, again, spirits that we should look to like all omniscient, powerful gods that are just like our mother and father here to help us and grow and learn. But they don't want to be our parents. They want to be our partners. Or as like my helping spirits once said to me, I want to be your ecstatic co-conspirator. Like I want you to be whispering your dreams to me and us planning together how we can make those happen. And so I think oftentimes we bring our baggage from our human experience of our, sort of shitty human boundaries as a contemporary Western person, if we are a contemporary Western person, to our spirit relationships. It's not something separate. It's not something like that's just automatically wonderful. Just like with everything, as within, so without. So we have to, often I find the best way to begin to form spirit relationships of trust is to really look at relationships in our life as well and look at what are the patterns in terms of our boundaries in relationship. Like, are we connected in with our anger? Do we allow ourselves to let our anger show us when our boundaries have been crossed or violated and what we need to do in the moment to repair or restore them? Are we willing to ask for what we need? Are we willing to say big yeses or big nos without fearing that they have a value judgment attached to them? And if we can begin to cultivate that ability in our own life, that greatly helps us to begin to cultivate that ability with the spirit world, and vice versa. Our spirits can teach us a lot about healthy boundaries just in how they respond to us and how they show up. But if you know you're in a really bad place with boundaries, you might want to work with a practitioner first to help you make those initial connections. So then if something is going wrong, it's more something that you need to talk about and feel into with your spirits rather than you dealing with an intrusive spirit.
That's great. So it sounds like if someone is dealing with significant unpacked trauma, that clouds the discernments around what is trustworthy, who is trustworthy. It might be helpful to work with a practitioner to help A, clear some of that trauma, and B, help make those discernments, right?
Absolutely.
And so, like, what are some other, because a lot of this work is, the technologies are available for us to do it on our own, right? That's what you're saying, is that these spirit helpers are there to work with us, to help us. Like, we just have to learn how to open the doors to receive their friendship, their guidance, their wisdom. But my sense is that sometimes, like you mentioned earlier, soul loss, sometimes we need a heavy hitter. We need somebody who's really on our side. We need like the bar bouncer who's going to, help us hold our boundaries, help us get parts of ourselves back. So like, when can I just do this work on my own? And when do I need to really hire someone to support me in doing this work?
That's a great question. So honestly, I find most people many people, not all people, many people come to a shaman when they're at the end of their rope, essentially. They maybe tried a few different other modalities, whether it be, they've been engaging in therapy or maybe still engaging in therapy. They've tried maybe like Reiki or some other healing modalities that are out there. And they've maybe seen some shifts, but so they know there's something here that they need to track, but they haven't been able to fully transform. And they're so frustrated with the current challenges they're facing, they're willing to risk letting die the person they currently are and to transform into the person that no longer has the challenges they face. And so I feel like that's often when it's a good time to reach out for the help of a shaman, that when you're at that point where you feel like, okay, I know something deep needs to change. I know this isn't just about trying to shore up the status quo, but I actually need to create a real deep shift and transformation in myself and in my life at this time. and I need help doing that. That's one time to come. If you're doing kind of somatic work or similar, like therapeutic or emotional clearing work, a time when I tell people how to discern when what they're dealing with is no longer in the realm that they can touch in the body versus it's something else is partly what we were talking about with the ancestral stuff. Like you just keep feeling this wave overtaking you no matter how much progress you make. Another aspect of that could be if you encounter soul loss, that often feels like just this gaping void inside of you that when you move towards that place, it just feels like a chasm, like just the floor drops out and you can't go any further. It's like you're too afraid, or there's beliefs you hold too deep seated to actually be able to, show up for yourself in the way you need to reintegrate the part of yourself stuck in that trauma. And often that's a sign there's some soul loss there. Another aspect that might be a sign it's time to go to a professional is just that you find yourself continually making circles that are like a little bit wider than the last circle. So it's like, oh, this is a slightly better version of this pattern, but it's still the same pattern. And you really know you need to shift this pattern in your life. I think that's a great time to engage or enlist the help of a practitioner. But also, if you just are feeling deeply cut off from any sense of purpose or meaning or your sexuality or your creativity, those are often big reasons that people might come to a shamanic practitioner to help see because that's our natural state of health should be being connected in with those energies. So if we're not feeling that, that's a big sign that we might need the help of someone else to kind of point our awareness and attention to what in us needs to shift or die or transform or be brought back and reclaimed to allow us to reorient to that energy. And I think it's important to note too, it's not about doing the work for the person, because the person will still need to use their skills after the healing to integrate whatever came up. Whether it be, for example, if a soul part is brought back, you don't just, like some people, instantly they feel a shift. They feel, most people actually feel some sort of deep emotional shift and they feel better in some way. But often soul parts, because we've been living for so long with this hole in us where that part of ourself is meant to be, we've learned to survive and adapt to living life in a way that avoids touching into that part of ourself, where that hole was. So now when that part of ourself is brought back, I have to guide clients in what do I need to start doing or stop doing to allow myself to fully integrate this part of myself that you've brought back. And that is what really engenders the true transformation. During this session, I'm creating shifts and people do experience deep transformations, but it's really sowing the seed of transformation in a way that's possible when you continue the work afterwards on your own to fully integrate with the energies that have come during the session.
I really love that answer. And I just kind of circling back to the last question about discernment of how do you know who you can trust in the spirit realm? I would say that you also answered the question, how do I know who I can trust as a practitioner, right? Like it's the person who's not doing it for you, but it's the person who's helping guide your experience with their skill set, right? And their experience, but they are supporting you in doing the work. And there's a recognition that you are, really in charge of your deepest healing, that's part of your purpose to do that. And they're just there to support that. So thank you for answering both of those questions that I didn't even ask. That's awesome.
And another thing I would say about that quickly is just that, there's always should be that balance. But also, I know some people that refer themselves as shamanic practitioners, I just want to make the distinction, simply guide people in journeys on their own behalf, like a person goes on the journey rather than the shamanic practitioner going on the journey themselves. And I would say that is not necessarily acting as a shamanic practitioner. That's something I do sometimes. I'll help facilitate journeys for clients, but as the practitioner, it is my job to be the one going into the spirit realm and finding these energies and creating shifts and bringing them back. But then it is the person's job to integrate those energies and as they shift and change in their life and really integrate the experiences they had as I was doing that. So it is a sort of symbiotic relationship. It's not that I'm responsible for their healing or that they're responsible for doing everything themselves.
And I think there's one more thing that I just want to draw out here, which is the value of paying someone to do this. Like in the financial exchange, there's a cleanness about the process, right? That there's a way that the energy exchange works so that there's just this simplicity, that it's not all like, especially with the tangly boundary stuff, that like paying someone and having a contract that is very clearly defined by those terms can be really helpful. And I just think that like sometimes folks have a hard time with that idea. Like it's like, oh, if it's spiritual money, like that feels messy. And but I think there's a lot of like really ethical reasons to engage with it in this way. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. If you are excited about it, I would love it if you would facilitate a little something.
Absolutely, yeah. So I talked a little less about the clearing work I do, which is helping people to build the skill of being able to engage with the felt sense in the body from a place of compassionate curiosity rather than judgment or shame or compartmentalizing. And through tracking these energies in our body, get to the root of where that sort of stuck place first started, and then clearing it there, seeing what needs to be reclaimed from that place and what needs to be sort of killed or cleared. And so what I'm going to do is a little intro exercise from that type of work, just helping people to get a sense of what it feels like to be in presence with our inner experience. So you might just take a moment wherever you are to get comfortable. And I'd recommend you probably are not operating heavy machinery or driving if you're doing this. And you might take a moment just to close your eyes and settle into your body. And just feel the weight of your body being supported by the earth and your chair rising up to hold you and meet you. Feel the air on your skin. And gently bring your awareness into your head and take a deep breath there. And take a deep breath into your throat. Take a deep breath into your heart. And take a deep breath into your solar plexus. Take a deep breath into your belly. Take a deep breath just below and at the bowl of your pelvis. And when you feel ready, just taking a moment to imagine yourself in a clearing with a deer on the edge of the forest just poking its head out. You have a little bit of food in your hand and you want to get that deer to approach you and eat from your hand. And just take a moment to notice what quality of awareness you bring to that deer. What your physicality is like. What emotional qualities you're feeling. And then when you're ready and you've experienced that, you can just allow that image to blow up and disappear. And take a moment to find yourself in a guidance counselor's office in a school, and there's a really angry parent who's coming in and they're shouting about what their kid just did, and the kid sits down in the chair and he politely asks the parent to leave, and the kid just has his arms crossed over his chest, and he's just sitting slumped down and looking very upset. You might just take a moment to sense, what would you do in that moment to help make that child feel comfortable opening up to you about what happened? Again, what quality of body and presence would you bring to that child? What would you say to that child? What gestures might you make to show him that he was safe and could talk to you? And when you feel ready, you can also allow that image to blow up and disappear. And now you might just take a moment to bring your awareness to your heart, sort of the energetic landscape of your heart. and almost magic school bus style, just to allow yourself to enter into that space in your heart as a landscape, like a little version of yourself. For some people, this might involve kinesthetic feeling of that heart space. For some people, you might get visuals. For some people, you might just have an intuitive knowing of what's there. Some people, you might hear or smell things or see colors. But just take a moment to explore that landscape of your heart as if it were a landscape, using your imaginal muscles, as if it was an ecosystem in that space, and just notice what it's like. Is it spacious or is it confined? Does it have a particular emotional quality to the space? You notice any particular animals or plants there, or what kind of ecosystem it is, or what the weather is like. Just take a moment to explore it. Just describing as much as you can with that same compassionate curiosity you brought to that animal in the woods and the child. Now bringing that to your own heart. And when you feel ready, you might take a moment just to call your inner healer into that space of your heart. And just notice who comes. Notice how you feel in their presence. Notice what you can describe about them. And take a moment just to sense from them if they have a message for you at this time. When you feel like you've received that message, just take a moment to thank your inner healer. And thank your body. Gently allow that space, that image of a landscape to blow up and disappear. And take a deep cleansing earth breath, just filling your body with earth energy from the feet to the head. And emptying it out. And taking a deep breath into your belly. A deep breath into your heart. And a deep breath into your head. And then gently turning your awareness to the feeling of the air on your skin and the weight of your body in your chair. And noticing the sounds coming back into the room. And when you feel ready, opening your eyes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So the intention of this podcast is about weaving together the healing of trauma, transgenerational trauma, and connecting with our bodies and connecting with our eroticism and connecting with the earth. And so I just want to wrap up the questions that I have for you with asking you about the erotic in terms of how the erotic can get blocked. And I noticed that you talked about that a little bit. You said that, one of the places that you might want to seek professional support is when you notice that you're not having access to the erotic. And we know that trauma, the triggers are a result of trauma, and trauma is living in the body, right? And and there's often this connection between trauma and the stories that we're telling ourselves, right? That are like they're reinforcing each other. So like there's the somatic reality of the trauma, and there's the story about the trauma or the coping mechanism story around the trauma. That and those things are kind of like mutually supporting each other in an unhealthy way. And so I'm curious what advice you can offer if someone is struggling with unhelpful stuckness around eros, of like how to clear that. How do we access that again?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I think from an indigenous perspective, our sexuality is really where we are most divine, because that is, in a sense, our creative center. So it connects us with the creator. And it's also the seat of our passion and our desire, which, again, from a shamanic perspective, is one of the key senses that helps us understand that almost ineffable, unique energy of our purpose, that we came to this planet to live. Those things that arouse us, that inspire us, that excite us, that give us that feeling in our belly of passion. So if, again, from a shamanic perspective, the most important cornerstone of our health is our purpose, and we need our access to our sexuality and creativity and passion to live that purpose, then that the erotic is really important. And we, in our culture, or at least in contemporary Western culture, there's so much shame and judgment that gets put upon that part of ourselves, especially as a queer person. And so the reason I mentioned that is like a sign you might want professional help is, I think it's a key part of our identity and our ability to engage with spirit, is that we begin to have a healthy relationship with that part of ourself as well. And so I guess in terms of what someone might do to heal it, really, part of shamanism is that it's not symptomatic, in the sense that we're not looking at constant constellations of symptoms and saying, oh, well, if you have this symptom, they need to do this. So I don't always have like a prescriptive idea of like, oh, well, if someone's having trouble with their sexuality, they need to do this, because what that block is there is going to be different for every person. But in terms of just basics, I find it to be really helpful to start with forming a healthy relationship with our grounding and our boundaries, because it's really, it takes a certain amount of vulnerability to be with our passions and to feel them rise up and to act on them. And if we don't have a sense of grounding and healthy boundaries, it's hard to feel safe connecting in that way, in that vulnerable way. So I find that one like simple thing someone could do if they know like, oh shit, I'm someone who has this problem, as I have been in my life, certainly at certain times, is to start with just a grounding practice of really moving fully into their body and rooting into the earth. And for some people, that can be a simple visualization of just like a tree with roots going down into the earth. For some people, they really need something more physical, like maybe a Qigong form or Tai Chi form, or that is grounding, or actually going out in nature somewhere and engaging with a tree, or even following the breath through meditation. But do whatever you need to do, because you know yourself best, to actually feel I am in my body right now, and my body is rooted into the earth, and I'm connected to the earth. And in cultivating that choice to be connected to the earth and in your body, which takes time, I find it begins to become easier to access our passions and our desires, because it's impossible to if we're not in our body in the first place. And so another part of that, though, I said, is boundaries too. So there's sort of two parts of boundaries. There's one part which is the practical everyday part I already spoke about, like saying yeses and nos and negotiating your boundaries. And but there's also the energetic component of actually the sort of the way energy follows thought or visuals, in a sense. So if you're taking time at the beginning of your day to really visualize what healthy boundaries look like and feel what the current state of your boundaries are, that can be very helpful. So generally speaking, a boundary should be energetically like this egg shape that's around our body. That's not our aura. It's a little bit closer to our body than that. It's like when you feel that someone's in your space, and it can be flexible. It can expand or contract. Like why you can see, like I'm in New York, so you can see people in the subway where it looks like it's a packed subway car, but no one is engaging with each other in any way, because everyone has their boundaries like shoved right next to their body in their own little bubbles. But it's also sort of part of ourselves that gives us helpful information. When our boundaries are operating skillfully, they're guiding us towards that which serves us and away from that which harms us. Kind of like the way you enter a room, maybe in a bar or something, you just get a feel for it right away, like what the energy of it is tonight. Our boundaries are the part of us that's communicating us that information in large part. And so we want them to be permeable also, like cell walls, kind of able to draw in the energy that's nourishing to us and expel stagnant energy or harmful energy. So just starting to visualize your boundaries in your morning with all of these qualities and getting a feel for what that feels like if you were held and protected in that way. And even calling in your ancestor helping spirits or your helping spirits to strengthen those boundaries for you as you walk throughout your day can be very helpful also in beginning to connect into that sexual creative center or feel safe enough to do so if you've had wounds with it in the past. And then I guess beyond that, just beginning to take note of desire. Sometimes we forget to just even notice. I've had an experience, I had a time in my life where my helping spirits guided me to start just writing every day down the things that arouse passion or desire in me, whether they were like creative or sexual or just fun, whatever it was. When I felt that rise in me, making sure I noted it down somewhere to begin to just start to feel my passions, the way that when we give attention to something, it begins to grow and be cultivated in a different way. And you can even add a practice of really honoring the things that make you feel passion or tending the energy of passion in your life through like maybe carrying around a little tobacco. And just when you feel that passion or witness someone with great passion, just offering a little bit of tobacco to tend that energy and begin to call it into your life and a different relationship with it in your life.
The thread that I have heard you weave again and again throughout the interview is about practicing for the sake of purpose. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate that. I think it's really, we're just so marketed to about like, just do this, just do that, but it's not, right? It's like a commitment to permanent practice of like, this is how I am tending my ancestors. This is through the wellness practices of my own body mm-hmm. that I'm committing to. So yeah, just thank you for the clarity, that you brought to the interview. I want to finish because I know you have a special offering coming up. And I just also want to bring folks' attention to the fact that you work with clients individually over Skype. So folks anywhere in the world could work with you on some of the things that you've mentioned. And if you would just talk a little bit more about the invitation for Healing Your Triggers live online emotional clearing intensive that you have coming up next month.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So I teach a class on the emotional clearing techniques I was talking about called Healing Your Triggers. And it's online. This next round starts October 8th. It's Sundays from 12 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. And what the class centers on is helping people to begin to, first of all, just notice when they've been triggered. Some of us don't even know, or some of us are getting triggered a lot, but we don't quite have the skills or tools to begin to unpack those triggers. And so the class operates from the belief that, or the experience that triggers are caused by moments often when during our childhood, we made a decision to survive. That was a good decision for us at that time, perhaps, because it allowed us to survive. But then that part of us, because that decision was not in alignment with our authenticity or our true nature, it was out of fear, that part of us gets stuck making that decision again and again. And so then when we encounter in our life similar situations, we find ourselves amping up or shutting down in response to them, projecting our experiences from the past so we can't see clearly, and often feeling much younger than our current age. And so this class begins to help us to, in those moments, notice what's going on and where we're feeling that trigger in our body, and then turning what I call turning over the stone, which is sort of engaging with life as a teacher, finding out that, so if we operate from the belief that anytime we're experiencing this, it's because somehow the external dynamic we're encountering mirrors an internal dynamic that needs our attention and love, then how do we track back our external energy we're experiencing into our body? And so I teach people tools to do that. And in the process of tracking that energy and bringing their compassionate curiosity to it, shifting and transforming it so they no longer have the same trigger, and their life and their body no longer conspire them to get to look at the same pattern again and again, because now they become the person who no longer carries that pattern. And so it involves we do that through live video classes that I put. Some of it is lecture, some of it is experiential exercises, and some of it is working outside of class once a week with a partner from the class to begin to learn to support each other in the clearing work. Also, the class includes one free session with me as well, which is a one-on-one guided session of the techniques working on a particular trigger or pattern.
That's such a lovely offering. I'm so grateful to your ancestors, especially the one that you named at the beginning of this interview, for the guidance into this work and that you're here in the world offering this and living your passion and your purpose. I think it's so needed, and I'm so grateful. And it's just been delightful to have this conversation with you, Langston. Just wanting folks to know that they can find out more about your work, about you, about connecting with you, about doing sessions with you, and about this offering, this workshop offering coming up in October on your website, which is occupy-your-heart.com, occupy-your-heart.com. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pavini. It was so great talking with you.
You're so welcome. And I'm really happy that everyone listened to this episode. And if you have felt significantly inspired by listening today, I'd like to ask you to do a favor for the podcast, which is to go over to iTunes and to subscribe, rate, and review Bespoken Bones. It really helps the podcast get more visibility and reach more folks who could benefit from it. So thanks for doing that. I am Pavini Moray, and this has been Bespoken Bones, and I'll be back every full and new moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom. Thank you.